Welcome to the Airline Podcast series brought to you by Fetcherr, where we take a deep dive on how AI and machine learning are impacting the aviation industry. Today I have Uri Yerushalmi, Chief AI Officer at Fetcherr, as my guest. Uri, thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Can you please tell us about your background?
Well, I've been playing with AI and computers since I was a kid. Back then, in the 80s, when I was in high school, my dad bought me some computer, and I started playing with it, writing programs, trying to make the program play chess. And since then, that's what I'm doing. I'm feeling blessed to do that work that I enjoy so much until now. And for the last 3 decades or so, I'm managing, initiating, and building projects that always surround about AI and building some kind of thinking machines. At some point, I made a stop and chose to go to the academia and learn about computational neuroscience, because I was and still a big believer that in order to build thinking machines, we need to mimic the way that the brain works. And that's why I went to the direction of computational neuroscience. And after the PhD, I started working in the algorithmic trading field, where I was head of AI in a big algo-trading company for more than a decade, applying techniques taken from AI into trading. And after that period, together with my partners, we have chosen to apply the same techniques on more traditional markets like aviation, and that's where we founded Fetcherr.
Mm-hmm. You know, AI is such a big word right now. There's a lot of hype around AI. You know, we're talking about ChatGPT. We're talking about, what OpenAI has been able to do, even with DALL-E as well. You know, as an AI expert, can you explain the difference between deep learning, generative AI, machine learning, and even if you can say some words on AGI, artificial general intelligence?
Yeah, so these concepts are quite confusing. Let's start with the artificial intelligence in general. That's the general term, and it talks about the ability of the machine to perform tasks that require some kind of human intelligence. Now, it relates also to the principle of mimicking the human mind, because you might try to perform this task just by setting rules for the machines, but that's not really interesting, because that's not the way humans think. Humans are more based on learning from data that they experience through their lives, and that's where machine learning comes into play, because you want to perform these tasks based on some data points, based on some samples, based on experience. So machine learning is a subfield of AI, where it is based on the machine learning based on samples. Another field that is even more concrete is related to the way that the brain works. Our brain is made of cells that communicate with each other. These cells are called neurons. And the technique of architecting these solutions using neurons that are connected in a network is called neural network or artificial neural networks. And that field is a field that exploded during the last decade. And that's where ChatGPT, for example, is an example of something that is based on these neural networks. Now, general intelligence is something that is that's the holy grail. That's trying to build some thinking machine that can do everything that is general. And another subfield that is quite flourishing during recent years is the field of generative AI. Generative AI is a subfield where the output of the AI is the task is generating some content. For example, generating video, as in deepfake, or generating text, as in ChatGPT, or generating images, as in DALL-E, or generating demand curves of airlines, as we are doing in Fetcherr. And generative AI is a quite successful field in recent years.
I want to take us a deep dive into how technology has impacted the financial markets, particularly in terms of results, optimization, efficiency, how the operations side looks. Can you kind of elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so I've been working in financial markets and capital markets for more than a decade, and the technology has dramatically changed these markets. It has allowed for new business model to emerge in these models, in these markets. The automation is very apparent in these markets, and it's not comparable to the way that these markets behaved before. The speed of making a transaction is something that you are trading in the exchanges. A trade can take nanoseconds, and that's something not comparable to the era before the technology has been so dominant in these markets. It relates also to transparency of the markets, the liquidity. Whenever you want to buy some financial instruments, it's always there. That's also thanks to the technology. But what's interesting is the dynamics in these markets. So in capital markets, there are always some buyer and some seller that are waiting to trade with each other. And a few decades ago, the spread between buyers and sellers was quite high. And that added some type of friction to the market. And now, as technology is more and more dominant in this market, the markets are getting more frictionless. And if they are frictionless, it invites more and more traders to come in. And as there are more traders that come in, then the market is getting even smoother. The prices do not change dramatically. And it's even cheaper to trade. So it's some kind of a process that feeds itself and invites more and more players to come to the market, that it is getting better and better over time.
There is some criticism on the, aviation industry. A lot of people are basically saying, there's too many technical failures. A lot of these companies are not able to scale properly. You mentioned frictionless. There's a lot of friction, currently going on today.
Absolutely.
In the aviation industry. And when you compare that to other, mainstream markets, like the financial markets, the stock markets, we see how, how they were able and are able to always optimize, always, scale. And I think technology has a big part in doing that. Can you kind of elaborate on what are the differences and how, how can the aviation industry, how can they do better?
Yeah, it relates to the history of these industries. Aviation industry was always about safety. If you look back in the 50s, 60s, it was always about being safe. That is the mindset, and it makes sense, right?
Not crashing, crashing.
Just don't
Priority
crash.
number one, don't crash.
Exactly. So safety is number one. And when that's the prioritization, it has some consequences, right? So if safety is number one, make it human. It says that humans should be involved in the decision making. And if that industry is very human decision oriented, then comparing to other markets like financial market, like capital markets, this market didn't like deploying software frequently. So software is deployed not frequently as opposed to exchanges or capital markets. And when it is deployed, it is deployed in patches. Very small steps forward. And that's another problem, because if you are putting patch on a patch on a patch, and these patches are not talking to each other, then you have a big problem. And it's beyond causing crashes. It's beyond stability. If the technology infrastructure in these markets is fragmented, and that's the consequence of putting patch on patch, then the whole mindset of the solution is problematic. For example, when you come to price in airlines, there is usually a total separation between pricing and revenue management, and it doesn't make
any sense.
Yeah. It does make sense from the historical perspective.
Or maybe it's easier to manage that on like the operations side, right?
It's easier to manage it if it's based on human decisions. But once you have the technology that can access it all and can centralize things and can take the decisions while taking into account all of these data points, then it doesn't make sense anymore. And now we are in an era where technology can make huge leaps in this industry, it makes sense to take advantage of it and make the right changes in such an industry. And the consequence would be not only making things faster and more stable and frictionless, it's also making the whole market less volatile. It also relates to middlemen that come into play, because there's friction currently in the market, and when there is friction, it makes sense for some middleman to come in and answer the problem of that friction. So once you take that out of the market, the middlemen are gone, and the costs for the end consumer gets lower.
So it benefits both the consumer,
exactly,
both the airline. In the long term, there is some transition period probably that they need to go through, but it's definitely a win-win situation.
Definitely, it's a win-win situation, because the whole market, the whole industry gets much more efficient.
We mentioned AI earlier in the conversation. In what way do you think, the application of AI in this industry, in this very traditional industry, how can that play an impact?
Well, as I said before, once the AI gets into the technology infrastructure of that industry, it makes better decisions. And if better decisions are made, first, it gets more revenue for the airline. Also, it makes the whole process of communicating with the consumer frictionless. And because it's frictionless, it cuts the middleman off. And therefore, the prices can be reduced. Not only for the prices get reduced for the end consumers. It also has a different aspect. It's not only getting more efficient. Once the whole process is smoother, as we saw in the financial industry, if you look at financial plots back in the 80s and compare them to the 90s and
different
2000s,
ball game. It's
a different ball game, and the whole industry is smoother. And being smooth means being less volatile, and being less volatile means that you feel more safe. it reduces the risk. And if that industry reduces the risk, it attracts more investments, and because investors don't like risk, right?
And they also don't like friction.
Exactly. So that makes more investment come into the industry, and the industry can get even better because of that, unrelated to the other factors that I mentioned before.
What are the main barriers then? This is a traditional industry. This is an industry that hasn't been innovating, like the e-commerce industry or like the capital markets. What are the main barriers? Why hasn't this been addressed yet?
Well, this market is very traditional. And because of the factors that I mentioned before, it is very human-based. Mm-hmm. But something changed in recent years, and that relates to the pandemic. Because when the pandemic occurred, the market changed in a sense that the players, the carriers understood that there is a need for the new technology. But the fear of the technology is still there. So there is a big gap now between the understanding of the need for the technology and the fear from the technology. And there are possibilities now. The new technologies that we are deploying now can bridge that gap using techniques like piggybacking. We are aware that the market and the infrastructure in these airlines are built patch on patch with different modules that sometimes do talk to each other and sometimes don't. And the techniques to use in order to onboard new airlines on these solutions are based on piggybacking without interacting much with all of the existing infrastructure out there. And also, once the airlines see the effectiveness of the new solutions that are based on AI, like using A/B testing, showing the outcomes with the AI and comparing to the outcomes without the AI, then the fear is lost because the airlines can sense the actual outcomes of such tools.
And they can probably see it later on the cap sheet, right? They see better revenues. They see costs being handled more effectively. ChatGPT has been creating a stir, right? I'm sure you've seen what's going on, and a lot of people are like super excited, right? This new unbelievable technology can make your work seamless. You can be much more productive. It can write articles for you. Like, there's so many positive things with this advancement. On the other hand, we are seeing people who are a bit freaked out. Is this going to take my job? Are we needed? We see content writers being scared. What, this machine can write 10 times faster than I can write. What do you think about that? Should we be scared? Is this gonna take some some human jobs? And I'll just kind of, before you answer that, I'll just bring into context for our listeners. I don't know if you heard, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, he's been asked that question, and he did say that some human jobs are not gonna be there.
Well, to understand the expected dynamics in markets, in that sense, we need to look from a higher macro level, and the big organizations that are playing in these markets are big companies or small companies that need to perform some tasks. And these companies don't really care whether the tasks are performed by humans or machines. They just want the best outcome for the task. Now, for getting the best outcome of the task, it is dependent of a set of capabilities, right? Computational capabilities, being aware of certain inputs, being aware of data points. Some capabilities are being now outperformed by machines. And for example, the ability to know and take into account many data points, the ability to be fast. These abilities are being outperformed by machines. Some abilities will be taken by machines in the short term. For example, being creative. That's something that we didn't think. Being creative by machines,
Yep.
it doesn't sound very appealing, but yeah, AI seems to be creative. But some of these capabilities will, by definition, always be done better by humans, like human communication, like empathy, like critical thinking. So when you have this set of capabilities, a company would always make a mix and match of capabilities and take the capabilities from humans that humans can do best. So what actually does it mean? It means that there's no competition between humans and AI. The competition is always between humans that cannot be empowered by AI and humans that can be empowered by AI. And of course, the latter is the one to win. So it's all a question of empowering people. And the companies that would succeed and the individuals that would succeed in the era of AI are ones that are capable and open to be empowered by these tools. And we should just see them as tools, not as individuals that come to replace us.
You know, when we're talking about AI, I'm easily thinking of, you know, early first movers, companies in traditional industries that risked it all. They believed in new technology and they went all in. We've seen that with Uber. We've seen that, you know, with Elon Musk, with the companies that he's doing. You know, what kind of advantages do you think first level movers right now are going to be able to make compared to other companies that, you know, that will hesitant in making some of those technology upgrades, so to speak?
Yeah, we see that in different markets. We see it also in, for example, in Amazon taking advantage of e-commerce technologies, and we saw it also in the capital markets, trading firms that could put their hands on new algorithms or new ways of thinking that are dominating the market for decades later. And when looking at all of these examples, you can see that it's not only being first does not only mean that for the first period you will take the low-hanging fruits by using the new technology. There's a hidden feedback loop here, because once you are using the new technology, you're getting more revenue, which is one type of resource. You're also getting knowledge of how to empower yourself with that new tool. And you are taking, and that's also another type of resource. So you're taking all of these resources, this new knowledge, and feeding it back, investing in your company. And then as the time passes, the outcome of being that early bird that uses the new technology, the outcome is exponential. And the impact is huge. And you're creating a competitive advantage if you're doing it early enough and you're smart enough to invest these resources back into your company. You have the potential to open a competitive advantage that cannot be reached by others later.
You're talking about the compound effect of that feedback loop, right?
Exactly.
So you need to be smart. You need to be smart in two ways. You need to be first smart enough to adapt the technology and to kind of integrate it into your software, right? And then you need to be smart enough to keep on being attentive to that feedback loop and keep on improving. And then when you look 5 years, 5 years down the road or up the road, whatever you want to call it, you have a big advantage over your competitors that are only now starting to implement that technology.
And they have no chance.
No
chance to reach your point because you're in a totally different level by then.
Can you explain the main differences, between how AI thinks and how humans thinks, and how is that? I'm sure that if we talked about AI 5 years ago, you could see the difference. But now, as you mentioned earlier in this conversation, we're seeing AI being super creative, right? We're seeing it develop, this kind of human-like creative abilities. What are the differences between AI?
Let's start with the shared components, because as the science progressed, the AI got to use principles that are taken from humans. These principles of having neural networks, the principles of basing your decision on data. And that creates a behavior that is, it's very interesting because you see phenomena in AI and in humans that are the same. For example, being biased. If my child would be visiting all day in social media of a certain type, he would be raised as a racist eventually. And the same for AI. If the AI is fed by bad data, it will take the wrong decisions. So being biased is one thing. Being able to generalize well is another thing. For us, data scientists and machine learning engineers, we have some fancy names for being able to generalize well or to remember specific samples or specific cases that we experienced, which are quite contradicting. In AI, it's called overfitting or underfitting. But the AI gradually is looking more and more like a human. But still, the AI has some abilities that the humans will not have, because it relates to the number of data points that the AI can process, and the humans are limited. It relates to the fact that when you are developing the AI, you can tell it, when taking that decision, don't look at that. Don't be afraid. Don't get emotionally biased. And in humans, you can't just close their eyes and tell them don't.
Yeah, we're emotional creatures.
We're emotional creatures, and it's not easy for our creator to just shut our eyes off. And we see it, for example, in trading. In trading, a human trader, usually when his stock starts dropping off, he will get emotionally biased and get out. Though in many cases he shouldn't, and he knows he shouldn't, but he's biased. And same for a data analyst or pricing analyst in an airline. When he sees that the day of departure is getting close, but no one bought tickets, he will usually get afraid and start selling off, drop the price. But the AI is not emotionally biased. The AI can look at previous cases and make the right decision in such cases.
You mentioned that airline example. The pandemic, right? That has taken an emotional toll on people, on lots of people, on the travel industry, on airlines, and it also kind of shifted the mindset of a lot of passengers. if business travel was such a big thing before, and now we're seeing more companies go to remote work, and now we're seeing, we're also seeing more leisure travelers doing a mix. They're traveling both for leisure and for work. So what this means is that the airline's customers, the passengers, are much more diverse than ever before. And I'm looking at some of these airlines, and I'm thinking to myself, how is revenue management looking like today in some of those airlines? Like, how is the adoption of AI helping them? What are some specific bullet points of effects that they're currently seeing?
Yeah, the pandemic was a big shift in the mindset of airlines, because one example is, the behavior of the customers have changed, but it also relates to the way that airlines used to make decisions up to the pandemic. Up to the pandemic, you could hear the term year on year very frequently in airlines, which means comparing, for trying to predict what would happen in the next week. Just look at last year on the same days, and you'll know what would happen next week, because year on year nothing changed. But as the pandemic started, the whole concept of year on year collapsed, and that concept being collapsing, the airlines found themselves without any tool to know, hey, what's going on, what's going to happen next week. And there was also another impact, that the airlines have released many of their pricing personnel. So they found themselves without methodology, without human resources, and the only solution is AI-based. And since then, I think the mindset of airlines has changed. They do understand that this technology is inevitable and needs to be installed there. But still, the fear is there, and I've mentioned how to deal with the fear.
You've, you're chief AI officer at Fetcherr. You guys have been making tons of noise out there in recent months. A lot of people are talking about your solutions. Can you briefly describe, what sets you guys apart?
Yeah, I think it relates to how do we see ourselves. We don't see ourselves as airline people or technology people. We see ourselves as some kind of a hedge fund. Because a hedge fund usually uses some strategies to make the most possible to raise the return for its investors.
Yeah.
But we are a very special type of hedge fund, where we don't have these types of investors. We have airlines as our customers. And we are using the same set of tools to maximize the revenue for our airlines. So instead of looking at it as portfolio of an investors, our portfolio to maximize is the portfolio of seats of the airline. That's the way we look at it. And we are using the same type of tools that have proven themselves in the capital markets in the last decades. And the whole architecture is taken from these markets, being very centralized, being using AI as a native tool, not as a patch, as I mentioned before.
Not trying to relieve the symptom, but actually tackling the root cause, right?
Exactly. And look at all possible data sources, because in trading, when you are building a trading machine, you are putting a lot of energy to know everything about every piece of stock moving around the world. So that's the concept here. You need to know about all possible data sources out there, and that, as in trading, where there is a high frequency trading concept, we are introducing high frequency pricing concept into this market, and it gives us the ability, for example, not to be only dynamic and continuous and real time, but also be very granular. Because if you are capable of pricing every flight separately, every ancillary separately, every seat separately, you are making the most for the airline. And it enables us to price in high volumes. And maybe the most important aspect of the mindset is that not being rule-based. Because usually in an airline, you have some set of rules where these rules are set in order to maximize the revenue. But when the essence of the solution is AI central, the approach can be just approaching the AI and telling it, maximize my revenue. Find your own rules to do that. I don't care about the rules as long as they make...
the outcome.
I care about the outcome, exactly.
You know, Uri, you've been super precious with your time. I do have a set of quick fire questions that I want to kind of shoot your way, and you know, you let me know if some of those questions are good for you. You know, you mentioned you guys act like a hedge fund. I love it. Is there any specific hedge fund that you admire specifically? It could be even like a specific guy, like Bill Ackman or Dan Loeb or someone else.
Yeah, there are many of them. Renaissance.
Oh, Renaissance. Jim Simmons, right?
Renaissance is a good one.
They work on AI, right? They have like a computer.
Yeah, one thing about hedge funds and the way they work is that no one knows what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, Jim Simmons is a big one. For the context for people who don't know, Jim Simmons, he's the head of Renaissance Technologies. Okay, next question. Any specific book that has kind of impacted you in terms of on AI or something?
Well, you know, in such fields, books are problematic because as the book is printed, is no longer relevant. I found myself writing a book a few years ago. It wasn't about AI. It was about software engineering. And yeah, it was a quite good one.
Is it out? Can you buy it, or like
you can buy it, but it stopped being relevant after 3-4 years. It was used to teach in universities programming in C# and .NET, but yeah, in technology you can't really count on books because they get outdated very very fast.
Next question. You know, human-boyed robots. You know, we talked a lot about software in this conversation. You know, when is the hardware going to catch up? When are we going to see robots?
I think we are quite close. Yeah, it's the problem with building these robots is that it's difficult to produce many data points for the AI to learn, because a child in its 3-4 first years, it produces a lot of data points, so his brain is capable of learning them, but you don't have that time for training the robots. But the simulations are getting much more sophisticated, and the techniques of the AI training is also getting sophisticated, and you can see, for example, Boston Robotics, they are doing great job.
Boston Dynamics,
yeah.
Amazing. In 5 to 10 years, how does the airline industry look like? How is that impacting, you know, and consumers, passengers?
Well, you will see AI everywhere in airlines. Now, the fact that airlines were late in adopting new technologies, that might actually turn out to be an advantage, because if you're late, then you can just wipe everything off and bring new things from scratch. So you'll see a lot of AI in airlines. And it might not be called AI because, for example, now when you're using a spell checker, you won't call it AI now, right? Because it's trivial.
Exactly.
So by the time it will be there, it won't be called AI, but it will be all over the industry. It will automate a lot of the processes, reduce a lot of the costs. The industry would get much more efficient. And since it's efficient, the end consumers can enjoy much lower prices and better service. And another impact would be that the number of players is going to be smaller. Many of the middlemen
Gonna be removed.
would be moved because the market would be frictionless and their role would be gone.
Uri Yerushalmi, Chief AI Officer of Fetcherr, thank you so much for taking the time for this valuable conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for listening to this show, to this episode. You can go follow Fetcherr on social media, on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel. And thank you again.